The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the empty space where my name was supposed to be. I told myself it had to be a mistake, but then I saw someone deliberately remove the place card and slip it into a pocket as if erasing me had always been part of the plan. Before I could ask a single question, another guest looked away instead of meeting my eyes, and suddenly I realized I wasn't the only person who knew something was terribly wrong. Then I heard a sentence I was never meant to hear, spoken just softly enough that everyone could pretend it never happened if I reacted. My heart told me to turn around and leave, but something deeper whispered that if I walked away now, I would never learn why the family I had spent more than 30 years protecting had decided I no longer belonged in it. And when I finally understood who had orchestrated every detail, I discovered that the missing chair was only the smallest part of what was about to happen. I stood perfectly still, forced a smile that didn't belong on my face, and stepped through the entrance anyway because some truths only reveal themselves when you refuse to run from them. Weddings are supposed to bring families together. At least that's what I believed for most of my 68 years. I had imagined this day so many times that I could almost hear the memories blending with the music before the ceremony even began. My son Daniel had found someone he loved. I wanted that to be enough. I wanted to believe every uncomfortable moment over the past several months had simply been the stress of planning a wedding. Every time Emily dismissed one of my suggestions, I reminded myself that brides carried impossible expectations. Every time she changed a family tradition without asking, I smiled and told myself young couples deserved the chance to create their own memories. Every time Daniel apologized with tired eyes and promised, "Mom, she's just overwhelmed," I accepted his explanation because loving your child sometimes means choosing peace over pride. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs lined up like footprints in fresh snow. Emily slowly became the person who answered questions meant for Daniel. Invitations that once included my opinion suddenly arrived already finalized. Family dinners became shorter, conversations became careful, and I noticed that every disagreement somehow ended with me apologizing, even when I couldn't explain what I had done wrong. I convinced myself that adjusting was part of becoming a mother-in-law. After all, families change. Children grow up. New people bring new traditions. I kept repeating those words until I almost believed them. But as I looked around the elegant ballroom that morning, with white roses arranged across every table and soft golden light spilling through the tall windows, something felt different. Guests greeted one another with warm smiles, servers carried polished silver trays through the room, and a string quartet rehearsed quietly near the front. Yet beneath all the beauty there was an uneasiness I couldn't quite name. People smiled at me for only a second before looking somewhere else. Conversations paused whenever I approached. It was subtle enough that no one could accuse anyone of being rude, but obvious enough that I could feel it settling heavily across my shoulders. That's when I realized the missing chair wasn't an accident. It was a message, and I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. I remained exactly where I was for another few seconds, pretending to admire the floral arrangements while my mind quietly searched for an explanation that did not exist. The missing chair could have been an honest mistake. The strange expressions on people's faces could have meant nothing. But my instincts had protected me more than once during my life, and they had never spoken this loudly. As I slowly walked farther into the ballroom, I noticed another detail. Every table displayed elegant ivory place cards written in the same graceful handwriting. Husbands and wives sat together. Parents sat close to their children. Lifelong friends were grouped carefully according to years of shared memories. Then I found my own card resting alone at a small table near the back of the room beside distant coworkers and vendors I had never met. It was impossible to believe someone had accidentally placed the groom's mother there. Months earlier, Emily had insisted on handling every seating arrangement herself. At the time, I admired her organization. She carried color-coded folders, detailed spreadsheets, and calendars filled with notes. Whenever I offered help, she smiled politely before saying she already had everything under control. I remember laughing with one of my friends, saying that young women today certainly knew how to plan beautiful weddings. I wish I had paid closer attention instead of making excuses. Looking back, the changes began almost immediately after Daniel proposed. Family traditions that had existed for generations quietly disappeared one after another. Emily decided there would be no family rehearsal dinner hosted at our home, because she preferred a private event at an upscale restaurant downtown. She replaced the family recipe dessert table with a professional pastry display because she wanted everything to match her vision. She even suggested that old family photographs might make the reception look too sentimental, explaining that modern weddings should feel elegant rather than nostalgic. None of those decisions seemed important by themselves. Every conversation ended the same way. Daniel would squeeze my hand, smile apologetically, and tell me they simply wanted to start their marriage with fresh traditions. I never argued because I remembered planning my own wedding decades earlier. Every generation deserves room to create something new. Yet there was one thing I could never quite explain. Emily always became unusually quiet whenever someone thanked me for helping Daniel become the kind and thoughtful man he was. If a relative complimented my son, she quickly redirected the conversation toward their future together. If someone mentioned a favorite childhood memory involving me, she somehow found a reason to change the subject. At first I believed I was imagining it. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. It was almost as if she wanted every chapter of Daniel's life to begin the moment she entered it. Standing in that ballroom, surrounded by smiling faces that suddenly felt unfamiliar, those memories returned one after another with uncomfortable clarity. I finally stopped asking whether I had misunderstood Emily. Instead, I began asking a far more unsettling question. How long had she been quietly rewriting our family's story, while I convinced myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as protecting the people I loved? Before I had time to decide whether I should confront anyone, the wedding coordinator approached me with a pleasant smile that looked carefully rehearsed. She greeted me warmly, thanked me for coming, and then gently guided me toward the table in the back of the ballroom. She never called me the groom's mother. She simply referred to me by my first name, as though I were another guest on the list. I almost corrected her, but something stopped me. Instead, I thanked her and continued walking, determined to understand how this could have happened. As I reached the table, my sister Linda quietly appeared beside me. She leaned close enough that no one else could hear her. "Margaret," she whispered, "did you ask to sit back here?" I slowly shook my head. The concern on her face confirmed that I was not imagining any of this. Before either of us could say another word, Emily walked gracefully across the ballroom wearing a bright smile that seemed flawless from a distance. Guests complimented her dress. Cameras followed her every movement. She looked every bit like the joyful bride everyone expected to see. Then she noticed me standing beside my assigned seat. For just a brief second, her smile changed. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice unless you were looking directly at her. She walked toward us with confident steps and wrapped one arm lightly around Daniel before speaking. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "I hope you understand that we had to make a few last-minute adjustments. We wanted the front tables to feel more balanced." Her words sounded polite, but they answered a question I had never asked. She knew exactly why I was standing there. I smiled as calmly as I could. "I am sure everything will be beautiful," I replied. Emily nodded, but there was something almost triumphant in her eyes. Daniel glanced between us for only a moment before another guest pulled him away to take photographs. He never noticed the silence that followed. Emily lowered her voice just enough that only I could hear. "Today is about Daniel and me," she said. "I would appreciate it if nothing distracted from that." Then she walked away before I could respond. It was not what she said that hurt the most. It was the unmistakable message behind her words. Somehow my very presence had become something she considered a distraction. I stood there watching friends and relatives laugh together, wondering how many of them knew what had just happened. A few people avoided looking in my direction. Others offered sympathetic smiles that disappeared the moment Emily came near. The ceremony had not even started, yet I already felt as though I had been quietly removed from my own son's life without anyone announcing it aloud. Then another surprise arrived. One of Daniel's childhood friends approached me carrying a folded program. He hesitated before handing it over. "Mrs. Collins," he said softly, "I thought maybe you should have this." I thanked him and opened it without thinking. As my eyes moved down the page listing the wedding party, the families, and the people being recognized for their love and support, I realized my name was nowhere to be found. I stared at the program for several long seconds, reading every line twice because my mind refused to accept what my eyes had already confirmed. Daniel's grandparents were listed with warmth and appreciation. Emily's parents received a heartfelt acknowledgement for their endless love and guidance. Friends who had known the couple for only a few years were thanked by name. Even the family dog appeared in a playful note near the bottom of the page. But somehow the woman who had carried Daniel, raised him, comforted him through every disappointment, and celebrated every success had simply disappeared from the story. I folded the program carefully instead of crumpling it. My hands remained steady, although my heart felt strangely distant from the rest of me. Years ago, my late husband used to tell me that the strongest people were not the loudest people. They were the ones who knew exactly when to remain silent. Standing there, I finally understood what he meant. If I reacted emotionally, everyone would remember my reaction. If I stayed calm, I might finally see everything that had been hidden from me. I slipped the program into my purse and quietly observed the room. It was remarkable what people revealed when they believed no one was paying attention. Emily moved gracefully from guest to guest, thanking everyone with practiced charm. She laughed easily, accepted compliments with perfect timing, and made every conversation seem effortless. Yet every few minutes her eyes searched the ballroom until they found me. She was not making sure I was comfortable. She was checking whether I had accepted the role she had assigned to me. That realization settled over me with surprising clarity. This had never been about one chair or one printed program. Those were only symbols. The real goal had been much larger. Emily wanted to redefine the family itself, and she wanted everyone present to witness the new version without questioning how it had happened. I remembered something Daniel had said only 3 weeks earlier while we were choosing music for the reception. He had looked uncomfortable before admitting that several family traditions had been removed because they no longer fit the atmosphere Emily envisioned. I had smiled and told him not to worry about me. I even thanked him for including me in the planning at all. Looking back, I realized he had been asking for understanding while never realizing what he was actually apologizing for. He had slowly become accustomed to changes that would have shocked him only a year earlier. That was how gradual influence worked. It rarely arrived all at once. It appeared one small compromise at a time until the impossible began to feel completely ordinary. My sister Linda returned carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. She handed me one without saying a word. After a moment she quietly asked, "What are you going to do?" I looked across the ballroom toward Daniel, who was smiling for photographs completely unaware of the quiet storm surrounding him. Then I looked toward Emily, who seemed absolutely certain that every piece of her carefully arranged plan was unfolding exactly as intended. I took a slow sip of water before answering. "Nothing yet," I said softly, "because I think today is finally going to show me who everyone really is, and I do not want anyone interrupting the truth before it has the chance to reveal itself." I stayed exactly where I was until the ceremony began, refusing to let disappointment dictate my next decision. For the first time that morning, I stopped thinking about how I had been treated and started paying attention to why everything had been arranged this way. There is a quiet kind of strength that comes with age. You learn that people often reveal far more through the patterns they create than through the words they speak. Emily had spent months carefully shaping every detail of this day. Nothing I had seen so far felt accidental. Every choice pointed toward the same conclusion. She wanted a new beginning, but one that appeared to have no past. As the guests found their seats, I quietly stepped into the hallway outside the ballroom. My purse rested comfortably on my shoulder, and inside was something I had almost forgotten. 2 weeks earlier, I had met with my attorney to finalize several estate documents that had been delayed after my husband's passing. Daniel already knew that one day he would inherit the family home along with several investments that his father and I had spent decades building. Those plans had never been a secret. My attorney had handed me a sealed envelope containing the completed paperwork and suggested I keep it somewhere safe until after the wedding festivities. Without thinking much about it, I had placed it inside my purse that morning before leaving home. I looked at the envelope for a brief moment, then closed my purse again. Whatever happened with my estate could wait. Today was not about money. It was about character. Even so, I reached for my telephone and quietly stepped into a nearby garden overlooking the reception venue. I called my attorney's office. When his assistant answered, I calmly asked if he was available for a brief message. A few moments later he came on the line. I thanked him for taking my call and made one simple request. Please do not process any future amendments to my estate unless they are discussed with me in person after today. He sounded slightly surprised but assured me everything would remain exactly as it was until I instructed otherwise. I thanked him again, wished him a pleasant weekend, and ended the call. It lasted less than 3 minutes. No dramatic confrontation. No emotional speech. Just one quiet decision that restored something I had not realized I was beginning to lose. Control over my own choices. When I returned inside, the music had started, and guests were smiling as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Emily caught sight of me from across the room. For a brief second she studied my face, almost as though she expected to see tears or anger. Instead, I smiled politely and nodded. She looked puzzled before quickly returning her attention to the photographers. That tiny moment told me more than any conversation could have. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for an emotional reaction. She had not prepared for patience. As I quietly took my assigned seat near the back of the room, I realized something important. Sometimes the strongest move is not announcing what you are about to do. Sometimes it is allowing everyone else to believe their plan is working, while you calmly decide what your future will look like after the celebration ends. And for the first time that morning, I no longer felt invisible. I felt observant. There was a very important difference. The ceremony itself unfolded with all the grace everyone had expected. The music filled the room, the vows were sincere, and when Daniel looked at Emily, I could still see the kind-hearted little boy I had raised inside the confident man standing at the altar. Whatever had happened before that moment, his happiness was real, and I refused to let my private pain diminish it. I applauded with everyone else as they were pronounced husband and wife, and for a little while I almost convinced myself that perhaps the rest of the day would pass quietly. But receptions have a way of revealing what ceremonies carefully conceal. As guests moved into the ballroom, conversations became more relaxed, laughter grew louder, and people began gathering around each table. I remained near the back, speaking with a few cousins who had traveled from out of state. Several of them quietly apologized for not realizing where I had been seated until after the ceremony began. I assured them everything was fine because I genuinely did not want anyone creating unnecessary tension on Daniel's wedding day. While we talked, I noticed Daniel making his way from table to table, thanking everyone for coming. When he finally reached mine, his smile faded ever so slightly. He looked around the table before looking back at me. "Mom," he said softly, "how did you end up sitting back here?" Before I could answer, Emily appeared beside him with perfect timing. She slipped her hand gently into his and answered for me. "We had to make a few adjustments because of the final guest count," she said with an effortless smile. "Everyone has been so understanding." Daniel looked uncertain, but guests from nearby tables were already calling his name, asking for photographs and congratulations. He gave me a quick hug and quietly promised that we would have more time to talk later that evening. Then he walked away with Emily beside him. As they disappeared into the crowd, my cousin Carol leaned toward me and whispered, "Margaret, that explanation does not make any sense." There were empty seats at the family tables all through the ceremony. I looked where she pointed. She was right. 2 chairs remained unoccupied near Emily's parents. Another seat at the head table had been left empty after a member of the wedding party canceled because of illness. There had never been a shortage of space. The arrangement had been intentional from the beginning. Not long afterward, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage to begin the reception program. He warmly thanked both families for supporting the newlyweds and invited Emily's father to deliver the first toast. His words were heartfelt, and I listened with sincere respect. When he finished, I expected the announcer to invite the groom's family to speak next, just as we had discussed months earlier. Instead, the program moved directly to the bridal party, followed by close friends from college. My name was never called. I reached into my purse and unfolded the printed schedule once more. The speaking order had been changed without anyone telling me. Around the room, I noticed several relatives exchanging confused glances. They remembered that I had spent weeks preparing a short blessing for Daniel and Emily. They also knew I had been practicing it because I wanted every word to come from the heart. I quietly folded the paper again and placed it back inside my purse. In that moment, it became impossible to dismiss everything as coincidence. The truth was no longer hidden beneath polite smiles. It was unfolding in front of dozens of witnesses, one carefully planned decision at a time. As the applause faded after the final toast, guests began returning to their conversations, but the atmosphere had shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quieter than that. People had started noticing the small details that no longer fit together. My cousin Carol reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "You were supposed to give a blessing, were not you?" she asked softly. I smiled and simply nodded. Before I could answer, Daniel appeared again, this time without Emily beside him. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from trying to make everyone happy at once. "Mom," he said, "I kept waiting for them to call you. What happened?" I looked into his eyes and saw genuine confusion. Whatever decisions had been made, he had not followed every change as closely as he believed. I could have handed him the program. I could have listed every moment that had quietly erased me from the celebration. Instead, I asked him one simple question. "Daniel, when was the last time you actually looked at the final schedule?" He hesitated. His silence answered for him. Before he could speak again, the wedding coordinator hurried over with an apologetic expression. "Daniel, we need you for the cake cutting," she said. He glanced back at me. "We will talk after this," he promised. "I mean it." I smiled and told him to enjoy his evening. As he walked away, I noticed him looking toward the stage instead of toward Emily. For the first time all day, doubt had entered his expression. A few minutes later, another unexpected moment unfolded. An elderly family friend named Robert, who had known my late husband for more than 40 years, stood to offer an unplanned toast. No one had scheduled him, but he was too respected for anyone to interrupt. He spoke warmly about marriage, commitment, and the importance of remembering the people who help shape our lives. Then he paused, looked directly toward my table and smiled. "Daniel," he said, "your father would have been so proud of the man you became, and I know Margaret deserves more credit than anyone here could ever express." The room became noticeably quieter. Several guests turned to look at me. Others looked toward Daniel. Even Emily's smile seemed to stiffen for the briefest moment. Robert continued without raising his voice. "Families grow stronger when they honor every generation, not when they forget the shoulders they stood upon." He lifted his glass, and dozens of guests instinctively followed his example. I did not stand. I simply smiled politely and thanked him with a small nod. It was enough. Nothing else needed to be said. Across the room, Daniel slowly turned toward Emily. He did not appear angry. He appeared thoughtful. It was the expression of someone comparing what he had just witnessed with everything he had accepted over the previous months. Emily leaned close and quietly said something to him, but instead of immediately agreeing as he usually did, he remained still. He looked around the ballroom, noticed the empty seats near the family tables, noticed my place at the back of the room, and then glanced toward the printed reception program resting on the head table. For the first time that entire day, I watched certainty disappear from Emily's face. She realized the carefully arranged picture she had spent months creating had begun to crack, not because I challenged it, but because the truth had quietly introduced itself without needing my help. The rest of the evening continued, but it no longer followed the script that had been so carefully arranged. Conversations drifted naturally toward the moments people had witnessed instead of the decorations or the music. Guests who had not noticed the seating arrangement before were now quietly comparing stories. Several relatives approached me simply to say they were glad to see me there, and each kind word carried more meaning than they probably realized. I thanked every one of them sincerely because I did not want sympathy. I only appreciated honesty. A short while later, Daniel found me standing alone near the garden doors where the evening air felt cooler than the crowded ballroom. He looked exhausted, but there was something different in his expression. He was no longer trying to rush from one obligation to another. He was searching for answers. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me the truth. Did you know about all of this before today?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I knew enough to recognize that something had changed," I replied. "But I wanted to be certain before I said anything that could never be taken back." He lowered his eyes. "I should have noticed," he admitted. "I kept believing every little change was unimportant." I gently placed my hand on his arm. "That is how little changes become very big ones," I said softly. They rarely happen all at once. Before he could respond, Emily joined us. She smiled politely, but her confidence no longer appeared effortless. She glanced from Daniel to me before saying, "I hope there are no misunderstandings. We were only trying to make everything run smoothly." Her voice remained calm, yet I sensed she was carefully choosing every word. I smiled with the same kindness I had shown throughout the day. "I believe weddings should celebrate love," I answered. "They should also remind us to honor the people who helped us become who we are." No accusation. No raised voices. Just a simple truth spoken with complete sincerity. Emily remained silent. Daniel looked at both of us before quietly asking to see the final seating chart and reception schedule after the celebration ended. It was not a demand. It was a request for understanding. Emily hesitated for only a second before agreeing, but the hesitation itself said more than any explanation could have. As they walked away together, I realized I no longer felt the need to defend myself. The questions I had carried all day now belonged to someone else. Later that evening, as guests prepared to leave, several older relatives embraced me warmly. One of Daniel's childhood teachers stopped beside me and smiled. "Your son became a good man because someone taught him kindness long before today," she said. Those simple words reached my heart more deeply than any formal recognition ever could have. Driving home beneath the quiet night sky, I thought about everything that had happened. I had not reclaimed a front row seat, delivered the blessing I had written, or changed the events of the day. What I had protected was something far more valuable. I had protected my dignity without asking anyone else's permission. Respect earned over a lifetime does not disappear because someone leaves your name off a program or moves your chair to the back of a room. It lives in the memories you build, the character you keep, and the calm strength that allows the truth to reveal itself when everyone is finally ready to see it. 3 weeks passed before Daniel called and asked if he could come by the house alone. His voice sounded older than I remembered, not because of time but because of understanding. When he arrived, he stood on the front porch for a moment before I opened the door. Then, without saying a single word, he wrapped his arms around me just as he had done when he was a frightened little boy after falling off his bicycle. Neither of us rushed to speak. Some conversations deserve silence before they deserve words. We sat together in the kitchen where I had packed thousands of school lunches, celebrated birthdays, and listened to every dream he had ever shared. Daniel looked around the room with quiet eyes before finally saying, "I missed what was happening because I believed peace meant staying silent. I thought every compromise was too small to matter." I smiled gently because I knew how easy that mistake was to make. "Life rarely changes all at once," I told him. "It changes one decision at a time until one day you wake up and wonder how everything became different." He nodded slowly and admitted that after the wedding he had asked to see every revised schedule, every seating chart, and every email related to the planning. For the first time, he realized how many decisions had been made without his attention. He also realized how often people had quietly assumed he agreed simply because he had never asked enough questions. I did not ask what happened afterward between him and Emily because that was now their marriage. And every marriage deserves the opportunity to find its own path with honesty and respect. My role was no longer to solve every problem. My role was to remain the same steady mother I had always tried to be. Before Daniel left that afternoon, I walked into my study and opened the drawer where the sealed estate documents still rested exactly where I had placed them after the wedding. I looked at the envelope for a long moment before returning it to the drawer unopened. I had made the right decision by refusing to let hurt feelings determine permanent choices. Property could always be discussed another day. Character could not. As the seasons changed, our family slowly found a quieter rhythm. Some relationships became stronger because they were finally built on honest conversations instead of polite assumptions. Others required patience and time. I learned that forgiveness does not always arrive in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it grows little by little, just like trust must be rebuilt one small act at a time. When I think back to that wedding now, I no longer remember the missing chair first. I remember the lesson it revealed. A person's place in a family is never determined by a printed program, a seating chart, or a carefully arranged photograph. It is earned through years of love, sacrifice, consistency, and kindness that no one can erase with a single decision. Someone may remove your name from a list, but they cannot remove your place from the hearts of those who truly know your story. That is why I no longer measure respect by where I am asked to sit. I measure it by the life I have lived, the values I have passed on, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing I never had to diminish someone else to protect my own dignity. In the end, that was the only seat that truly mattered, and it was one no one could ever take away.